Chapter 8. Orbit. Okafor. The Atavist broke orbit at 0600 ship time, 17 hours after the team's return from the surface. Okafor stood in the observation lounge and watched Tenebris shrink on the viewport, a dark sphere diminishing against a darker background, the dim red star behind it casting just enough light to define the planet's edge before it dissolved into the void. 4 people had died on that world. 3 of hers, 1 civilian, Sato, Marsh, Obi, and Volkov, who was alive but had left something of himself in the tunnels that wasn't coming back. She watched until the planet was indistinguishable from the stars around it, and then she watched a while longer because turning away felt like an act of completion, and she wasn't ready to be complete. The first day of transit was administrative. Reports to write, transmissions to compose, the bureaucratic machinery of accountability that followed every operation regardless of outcome. Okafor had written after-action reports for 12 years, and the process was mechanical. Inputs, outputs, timelines, assessments. She could produce the document in her sleep. She couldn't produce this one. Every sentence required a decision about language. Hostile biological organism or indigenous apex predator. Tactical withdrawal or retreat under pursuit. Casualties sustained during extraction, or 3 members of my team were killed by something I couldn't protect them from, in an environment I shouldn't have taken them into on a mission compromised from the start by institutional dishonesty. She wrote the report. She used the professional language. She described the mission chronologically, accurately, and completely. She included Tanaka's geological assessment, Marsh's biological observations, recovered from his helmet camera and suit recorder, the data surviving the scientist who'd gathered it, and her own tactical analysis. She included the creature encounter in Chamber 9, the gallery engagement, the pursuit through the tunnels. She included Sato's death, Marsh's death, Obi's death. She described each one with the clinical precision that the format demanded and that her grief rejected. She included her recommendation: immediate interdiction of Tenebris. Category 5. Biohazard classification. No further human presence on the planet's surface pending a full military assessment by a force package capable of sustained operations in a hostile subsurface environment. No specimen recovery operations. No corporate access. She included Tanaka's hypothesis about dispersal strategy. She labeled it as unconfirmed. She recommended it be treated as a working assumption until disproven. She included the samples. This section took her longer than the rest of the report combined. The samples existed because Marsh had prepared them before the surface descent. They were in the ship's laboratory, in biohazard-rated containment, monitored by the ship's environmental sensors. They represented the only physical material from Tenebris available for analysis. She described the competing arguments for preservation and destruction. She presented them even-handedly because the report needed to be a tool for decision-makers, not an argument for a conclusion she'd already reached. She included Tanaka's conditions for preservation: Erebus quarantine facility, independent oversight, full disclosure, destruction protocol. She did not include her own assessment, which was that the samples should have been thrown out the airlock the moment she'd learned of their existence. She didn't include it because she wasn't certain it was right. And in a document that would inform decisions affecting thousands of lives, uncertainty was more honest than conviction. She sent the report. She composed the transmissions to Aegis, to the Accord, to Erebus Station Command. She sent those too. Then she sat in the communications bay and listened to the signals travel, encoded pulses of light, carrying the weight of everything she'd seen and lost and failed to prevent, toward a way station that would receive them in hours and argue about them for weeks. The second day was quiet. The ship carried 4 functional people and 1 non-functional person through the void between Tenebris and Erebus Station, and the void didn't care about any of them. Achebe cleaned her weapon. The squad automatic had fired 160 rounds during the mission. She cleaned each component with the same methodical attention she always gave the process, but Okafor noticed that she cleaned them twice, which was unusual, and that her hands paused occasionally over specific parts: the barrel, the feed mechanism. In moments of stillness that might have been maintenance assessment, or might have been something else. Achebe had fired on 2 creatures and failed to stop either one permanently. For a weapons specialist whose professional identity was built on the reliable delivery of lethal force, this was not a technical failure. It was an existential one. The weapon she'd trained with, trusted, built her career around, was insufficient against the threat. That knowledge was sitting in her the way the bullets had sat in the creatures, present, felt, unable to be expelled. Ruiz spent time in the ship's small gym, long sessions punishing, the kind of physical exertion that served as a substitute for emotional processing. Okafor recognized the pattern because she'd used it herself in younger years, before she'd learned that the body could absorb only so much of the mind's burden before it started breaking down. She let Ruiz run. The young woman would find her own equilibrium, or she wouldn't, and either outcome was beyond Okafor's ability to control. Karim found her in the observation lounge on the second evening. He sat down beside her without invitation. The viewport showed stars. "Team debrief is compiled," he said. Individual statements from Achebe, Ruiz, and Davidge. Tanaka submitted her report separately. "Volkov," he paused. "Davidge says Volkov is responding to stimuli more consistently. He recognized Davidge's voice this afternoon. Asked where he was. Couldn't remember the caves." "That might be a mercy." "Might be." Karim was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Obi." "So have I." He didn't have to stop when Volkov went down. He could have kept running and Volkov would have been the one left behind. Obi made a choice in less than a second, and the choice was to turn around. That's who he was. That's who he was. 15 years of operating on the principle that efficiency was everything, that you stripped yourself to function, and function was survival. And in the last 10 seconds of his life, he threw all of it away to pull a man off the floor who he barely knew and didn't particularly like. Maybe that's what efficiency looks like when it matters. Not the 15 years of stripping away, the one moment of adding back. Karim looked at her. 4 years of shared operations had built a vocabulary between them that operated below language, and Okafor could read what his face was saying. Gratitude, grief, and the particular exhaustion of a soldier who'd lost people he was responsible for and was carrying that weight with the same discipline he carried everything else. "Sarai, the creatures let us go." "I know. I've been running it through every tactical framework I have. None of them fit. Territorial defense, they drove us out and stopped at the boundary. Predatory culling, they took 3 and allowed 4 to escape. Resource management, they harvested what they needed and released the surplus. None of these fully explain the behavior. Tanaka's hypothesis does. Tanaka's hypothesis terrifies me. It should. If she's right, if the organisms have a dispersal strategy that involves letting visitors leave with biological material, then everything that happened down there was managed. The encounter in Chamber 9, the pursuit, the selective kills, all of it designed to achieve a specific outcome. A small number of survivors returning to the wider human population, carrying samples, data, and the compulsion to study what they've found. "The compulsion to come back," Okafor said. "Yes, the compulsion to come back. Because we will. Humanity will. We found something we can't explain and we can't resist, and every institution we've built, scientific, military, corporate, is structured around the principle that the unknown must be investigated. The creatures don't need to spread themselves. They just need to be interesting enough that we do it for them. The stars moved in the viewport. The ship hummed. Somewhere in the laboratory, 4 sealed containers sat on a table, warm and patient. "I'm doubling the monitoring on the samples," Okafor said. "Continuous environmental readings, temperature, atmospheric composition, any biological activity. If anything changes, anything at all, we jettison immediately. No discussion." "Agreed." "And when we reach Erebus, the samples go to the quarantine facility under Accord authority. Not Horizon, not Aegis. Independent oversight, full disclosure, Tanaka's conditions." "Agreed." "And one more thing." Okafor turned from the viewport. "I want full medical scans of the entire team before we dock. Blood work, imaging, physical examination. Everything Mara Okoro documented in her logs. The thread structures, the subcutaneous changes, the early markers of infection. We check everyone." "You think someone's infected?" "I think we spent hours in an environment saturated with the organism's biological material. I think we entered a chamber full of seed formations that may activate in proximity to viable hosts. I think 3 of our people were killed in ways that involved direct physical contact with the creatures, and the rest of us were in enclosed spaces where the air, the walls, and the floor were coated in organic material of unknown properties. I think the probability is low, and I think the consequences of being wrong are high enough that probability doesn't matter." Karim nodded. He didn't argue, didn't question, didn't offer reassurance. He understood the math the same way she did. Not as numbers, but as responsibility. The weight of 400 dead on Tenebris, carried by a ship with 7 people aboard, heading toward a station with 8,000 more. "I'll schedule the scans with Davidge," he said. "Full panel, first thing tomorrow." "Tonight." "Tonight then." He left. Okafor sat in the observation lounge. The stars turned slowly in the viewport. She thought about Obi, the turn. The decision made in less than a second to stop, to reach, to sacrifice speed for someone else's life. The most human thing she'd ever seen, performed by the man who'd spent 15 years making himself into a machine. She thought about Sato, 22, the surprise on his face, the innocence of a death that arrived before fear could. She thought about Marsh, the weight in his pockets, the choice that had slowed him by half a step, and the half step that had killed him. 3 people who had trusted her to bring them home. 3 people she'd failed in the most fundamental way a commander could fail. Not through incompetence or cowardice, but through the simple, irreducible fact that the situation had exceeded her capacity to control it. She'd made the right calls. Karim had said so. The right calls hadn't been enough, because rightness operated within a framework, and the framework had been inadequate to the reality. She carried them. She would always carry them. The names, the faces, the moments of their dying. They were hers now, added to the others she'd accumulated over 12 years of operations. A private census of the dead that grew with each deployment and never shrank. She turned from the viewport and went to find Davidge. The medical scans were conducted that evening. Davidge set up in the ship's medical bay with the portable ultrasound, the blood analysis unit, and the full-body scanner that the Atavist carried as standard equipment. It wasn't the most sophisticated diagnostic suite. A hospital ship or a station medical facility would have been better, but it was sufficient for what they were looking for. Okafor went first. She stripped to base layers and submitted to the scan with the impatience of a commander who wanted the process done and the results known. Davidge was thorough. Blood draw, full-body imaging, targeted ultrasound of the areas that Mara Okoro's logs had identified as primary infection sites: the back, the neck, the torso. Clean. No anomalies, no subcutaneous structures, no discoloration. Blood work within normal parameters. Karim, clean. Achebe, clean. Tanaka, clean. Volkov was scanned in his sedated state. Clean. His physical health was uncompromised. The damage was entirely psychological, invisible to the scanner, visible to anyone who looked at his eyes. David scanned himself using the ship's automated diagnostic function, a less precise method, but adequate for detecting the gross structural changes that characterize the early stages of infection. Clean. Ruiz was last. She came to the medical bay from the gym, still in her workout clothes, her skin flushed with exertion. She sat on the examination bed and pulled off her shirt without being asked. Efficient, no nonsense, the frontier pragmatism that defined everything she did. "Let's get this done," she said. David started with the blood draw, routine. Then the full body scan, standing position, arms raised, the scanner cycling around her in a slow orbit. David watched the display, his eyes tracking the imaging data with the focused attention of a medic looking for something he desperately wanted not to find. The scan completed. David looked at the results. His face didn't change. Nothing moved, nothing tightened, nothing shifted in his expression. But his hands stopped. The constant fidgeting, the tapping, the restless energy that animated him every waking moment. All of it ceased. His hands came to rest on the console and stayed there. Okafor saw it from across the room. She saw the stillness and understood its meaning before a word was spoken, because David's silence was the most reliable diagnostic tool on the ship. "David," she said. He didn't respond immediately. He was looking at the screen, at the imaging data, at a specific region of the scan that he was magnifying with small, precise adjustments of the display controls. His face was still. His eyes were not. "Ruiz," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, stripped of every verbal mannerism, every tangent, every excess word. "I need to do a targeted ultrasound, lower back, left side." Ruiz looked at him. She was smart, she was perceptive, and she'd spent enough time around medics to read their behavior. She read David's silence the same way Okafor had. The color didn't drain from her face. It retreated, pulling inward, leaving the surface pale and still. "Okay," she said. She turned on the bed, presenting her back. David applied the ultrasound transducer to the area the scanner had flagged. Lower left back, just above the hip, an area covered by the lower panel of her environmental suit during the mission. The image appeared on the screen. Okafor moved closer. She didn't need to. She could see it from where she stood. The display was clear enough, the image sharp enough, the anomaly obvious enough that distance was irrelevant. Thread-like structures, fine, branching, woven through the subcutaneous tissue in a pattern that Okafor had seen before. In Mara Okoro's medical logs, in the ultrasound images of Carl Engström's back, in the documentation of a process that began with threads and ended with something tearing its way out of a human body. The structures were small, early stage, a network maybe 5 centimeters across, centered on a point in Ruiz's lower back where the suit had been abraded during the mission. The narrow passage near Junction 4, the bottleneck they'd squeezed through during the retreat, the walls coated in biological material, every surface pressed against their suits as they pushed through. The suit had been scraped, the outer layer abraded, and somewhere in that contact, in the fraction of a second when the coated wall had pressed against the thinned material, something had gotten through. Something small. Something designed to be small, designed to find the gap, designed to exploit the vulnerability that no suit could fully eliminate. The simple reality that fabric was not armor, and the space between human skin and the outside world was never truly sealed. Ruiz sat on the examination bed with her back to the room and her future on the screen, and said nothing for a very long time. "How bad?" she asked finally. Davidge answered with the honesty she deserved. "Early stage, the structures are minimal, consistent with an infection window of approximately 48 to 72 hours. Based on Dr. Okoro's progression notes, you're in the earliest phase. The network hasn't reached deep tissue or integrated with major anatomical structures. Can you remove it?" "I don't know. Okoro's notes say removal at advanced stages would be fatal. The structures integrate with the spine and musculature. At this stage, the integration is superficial. Theoretically, surgical excision might be possible. But I'm a combat medic, not a surgeon, and the organism's biology doesn't follow any terrestrial model. I could cut into you and find that the structures respond to intervention in ways I can't predict." "Erebus," Okafor said. "Erebus Station has a full surgical suite, specialists. If early-stage excision is possible, they'll have the capability." "We're 8 hours out," Davidge said. "The progression rate based on Okoro's timeline is slow in the early stages. Days, not hours. If we get Ruiz into a proper medical facility within 8 hours, there may be a window." "Maybe," Ruiz said. "Maybe," Davidge confirmed. "I won't lie to you, Joe. I don't know enough about this organism to promise anything. Nobody does. But early detection is better than late detection. Okoro's patients weren't identified until the process was advanced. You're ahead of where they were." Ruiz was quiet. She looked at her hands, turning them over, studying the familiar topography of her own skin. The hands of a frontier survivor, scarred and calloused and strong. Hands that had held weapons and pulled teammates from danger, and done the work of staying alive in places that tried to kill you. "Does the team know?" she asked. "Not yet," Okafor said. "Davidge and I only." "Tell them, all of them, no secrets. We've had enough of those." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. And Commander..." Ruiz looked at her, and in her eyes Okafor saw something that she recognized from 12 years of leading people into places where the worst could happen, and often did. Not fear, though fear was there. Not resignation, though resignation was coming. Determination. The particular, fierce resolve of a person who has been told that something terrible is happening to them, and has decided, in that first crystalline moment of understanding, that they will face it on their feet. "I want to be conscious when we dock. I want to walk off this ship myself. Whatever happens after that, quarantine, surgery, whatever, I'm walking in, not carried, not sedated, walking." "You'll walk," Okafor said. "I'll be beside you." "Then let's get moving. 8 hours is 8 hours." Okafor went to the communications bay. She sat down at the console and opened a new transmission. Priority 1, Emergency Classification, Erebus Station Command. The cursor blinked. The message field was empty. The weight of what she needed to say pressed against the inside of her skull like pressure at depth. She thought about Thomas Reyes, a 26-year-old survey assistant, alone in a sealed room, typing the most important message of his life on a cracked datapad while the colony died around him. He'd found the words. He'd turned horror into warning. He'd reached across the void between his death and someone else's life and tried to make a bridge. She owed him the same. She began to type. Priority 1, Erebus Station Command, Classification, Emergency. Biological hazard from Commander Sarai Okafor, Aegis Corp, RV Atavist. This vessel is approximately 8 hours from Erebus Station approach. We are returning from the Tenebris colony assessment mission with a crew of 7, 3 fewer than departed. 3 team members were killed during operations on the planet's surface. I am reporting a confirmed biological infection in a surviving crew member. The organism is consistent with the hostile biological agent responsible for the destruction of Tenebris colony. The infection was detected at early stage through medical imaging and is currently localized. The infected crew member is conscious, stable, and aware of her condition. I am requesting the following upon arrival. 1. Immediate quarantine protocols for the entire crew. No exceptions. 2. A dedicated biohazard surgical team with capability for subcutaneous excision of an unknown biological structure. Time is critical. The organism integrates progressively with host tissue and the window for viable removal is unknown. 3. A secured biohazard containment facility for biological samples currently aboard this vessel. The samples are in sealed Level 4 containment and must be transferred to independent custody under Accord jurisdiction. They must not be released to Horizon Industries. 4. Full decontamination of this vessel before any non-quarantined personnel board. I am also transmitting, under separate encryption, the complete mission data from the Tenebris assessment. This includes geological surveys, biological observations, medical documentation recovered from the colony, tactical analysis of the hostile organisms, and the unredacted emergency transmission from Tenebris colony's final survivor. The organism on Tenebris is not contained to that planet. It is on this ship. It may be in the samples we are carrying. It is in the body of one of my people. The decisions made in the next 24 hours regarding quarantine, containment, and response will determine whether this threat remains localized or becomes something that the colonial zone is not equipped to survive. I have lost 3 people to this organism. I do not intend to lose more. Please have medical personnel standing by upon our arrival. Commander Sarai Okafor, Aegis Corp. Rapid response, R.V. Atavist. She sent the transmission. She watched the confirmation flash on the screen. Signal acquired, relay engaged, message traveling. Hours from now, someone on Erebus Station would read those words, and the machinery of response would engage. Medical teams mobilized, quarantine protocols activated, containment facilities prepared. The systems would do what systems were designed to do. Whether they would be enough was a question that Okafor couldn't answer and couldn't control. She sat in the communications bay. The ship hummed around her. The drives pushed them through the void toward the station, toward the 8,000 people who didn't know what was coming, toward the next chapter of a story that had started in a cave on a frozen world and was not going to end at a way station. She thought about the creatures in the gallery, the patience, the intelligence, the vast, unhurried attention of organisms that had been alive for longer than human civilization, and would be alive long after the Atavist and everyone aboard it had ceased to exist. She thought about their behavior, the herding, the selective killing, the restraint that looked like mercy but might have been strategy. She thought about Tanaka's hypothesis and Kareem's fear and the samples in the laboratory and the threads growing in Ruiz's back. She thought about Tomas Reyes, alone in his quarantine room, typing his warning into a cracked datapad. Burn it if you can. Leave it if you can't. But do not dig. They hadn't listened. They'd come to Tenebris and they'd dug and they'd carried pieces of it home, and now the digging was inside one of her people, thread by thread, cell by cell, the patient architecture of something ancient, building itself a new body in the flesh of a woman who'd done everything right and been betrayed by a fraction of a millimeter of a braided suit fabric. Okafor stood. She left the communications bay and walked the corridor to the medical bay. Through the viewport at the end of the corridor, stars moved in their slow carousel, distant, cold, indifferent. Between them, invisible, the relay network carried her message toward Erebus Station. Behind them, invisible, Tenebris orbited its dying star. Ahead of them, invisible, the future waited with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. She reached the medical bay. Through the small window in the door, she could see Ruiz sitting on the examination bed, talking with David, her back straight, her face set, her hands steady in her lap. A soldier processing a diagnosis. A human being staring down a timeline that might be measured in days. Okafor opened the door. Ruiz looked up. Their eyes met. 8 hours, Okafor said. 8 hours, Ruiz confirmed. Okafor sat down beside her because she'd said she would, and because some promises were the only things left that meant anything. The ship moved through the dark. The samples sat in their containers. The threads grew in their patterns. The stars turned overhead, ancient and remote, lighting the way to a future that was already in motion, already spreading, already carried in the bodies of the living, toward the worlds of the unsuspecting. The creatures had let them leave. The visitors were carrying gifts, and somewhere in the dark between worlds, the seeds were warm. End. There are more stories in this universe, more colonies, more creatures, more people who don't make it home. Like, subscribe and stay in the dark with us.